In 1184, over 60 nobles plunged to their deaths in a latrine. Yes, a toilet. And no, this isn't a bad medieval joke. This is the story about how 60 nobles basically drowned in poop. But what led to so many nobles meeting such a humiliating end in the cesspit of a German monastery? Our story begins in the city of Erfurt, what is now modern-day Germany. In the 12th century, it was a thriving commercial and political hub in the Holy Roman Empire, a place where power struggles were as common as market days. At the time, the empire was under rule of Frederick I, also known as Frederick Barbarossa, one of the most powerful and ambitious emperors of the medieval world. Like many rulers at the time, Barbarossa was constantly mediating disputes among his vassals. In the summer of 1184, he summoned a meeting, a Hoftag, essentially an imperial assembly to be held in Erfurt. The goal? To resolve a bitter conflict between two feuding noble houses. It should have been a routine diplomatic affair. Instead, it turned into one of the most morbidly absurd events in medieval history. The meeting was held on the upper floor of the Petersberg Citadel, a Benedictine monastery that had been converted, at least temporarily, into a courtroom and council chamber. The nobles of the empire, counts, dukes, and bishops crowded into the hall, all dressed into their finest, ready to argue over land, honor, and titles. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder. The air must have been thick with tension and likely with heat. This was July after all, and medieval architecture wasn't known for its ventilation. Above them, Frederick Barbarossa himself presided, commanding order and authority. But beneath them was something much less regal. The floor they stood on, as grand as it might have appeared, was made of rotting wood. And worse, it covered the monastery's latrine pit, essentially a giant septic tank of the building. Then, with no warning, the floor gave away. With a massive, echoing crack, the timber supports buckled under the weight of dozens of armored men. The entire assembly crashed down into the latrine below, into a cesspit filled with human waste and runoff that had accumulated over years. Some were crushed by the falling debris. Many drowned in the filth. And because the pit was deep and enclosed, there was almost no chance of escape. In the chaos and darkness, over 60 nobles perished, not by sword or battlefield, but by one of the most ignoble fates imaginable. Some accounts say the screams could be heard across the citadel. Rescue attempts were mounted, but the sheer volume of rubble combined with the deadly fumes from the pit made the effort nearly impossible. Those who survived were the few standing near the edges or those lucky enough to grab a hold of something as the floor collapsed. And as for the Emperor Barbarossa, he survived, miraculously, because he was seated in a part of the room that didn't collapse. History doesn't record whether he looked on in horror or disgust. News of the disaster spread quickly, though accounts of the incident were hushed in many official chronicles. After all, this wasn't exactly a moment of imperial glory. Some chroniclers tried to spin it as a divine punishment for greed and sin. Others, more practically, saw it as brutal architectural failure, possibly due to years of neglect or the weight of so many armored nobles in one place. The political consequences were mixed. The feud the assembly was meant to resolve forgot, overshadowed by the tragedy. Many noble families lost their patriarchs, and it would take years for the social and political ripple effects to settle. Today, Erfurt is a city with charming architecture and a deep sense of history, but most visitors have no idea that beneath their feet once lay the site of one of the strangest mass deaths in European aristocracy. Historians still debate some of the details, like the exact number of the dead, or whether the pit was a latrine or a simple cellar, but the core of the story remains the same. A room full of powerful men, a floor built on bad foundations, and a disaster that no one could have predicted. In a way, it's poetic. In an era obsessed with a hierarchy and a divine right, fate reminded them, in the most humiliating way possible, that everyone, no matter how noble, is just one step away from disaster. Thanks for listening to this wild journey of medieval madness. If you think the Erfurt latrine disaster was bizarre, just wait till you hear about the animal trials in the Middle Ages. Click over to my next video to find out how the legal system tried to lay down the law on livestock. Until next time, stay curious and watch where you step, please.